Next month is gonna be busy, and I know that typically speaking, when my life gets busy, I start to neglect my journal. It's not necessarily the best course of action, but it does seem to be the one that I often default to, so I want to set up my journal in a way that's gonna make it really easy to fill in, and thus help me get things done. Before we get into the setup though, let's first have a look at how this month was going. For the first cycle of quarter 3, or what most people would probably call July, I was going with a very scrapbooky, kind of like loosely inspired travel theme, with my general thinking being like traveling amongst the stars. So we have a lot of celestial elements, we've also got some map washi tape, and I have very much been enjoying it, even though this page wouldn't necessarily lead you to believe that. I found that I didn't really need a month-long mind unwind this time around, and I probably won't need one next month either, so I'm thinking that might be something I leave out, but in general the kind of scrapbooky style of decoration has been really fun. Something I did find a little tedious though was having to stick in pieces of paper, because this piece of paper here and the text beneath it, that one's actually just regular paper, so needs an adhesive, whereas the map washi and the stickers obviously have a sticky backing, and so do the headers that I've used throughout. With that in mind, and the fact that next month is going to be busy, I wanted to make sure that any decoration that I was picking already has an adhesive if I'm going to be sticking it in, or if I wanted to go with hand-drawn elements, they had to be super easy to draw. In terms of the weekly structure, I've been using the same structure for the entire of the cycle, and it is working well so far. I didn't really use my task list in the first week, this one being a weekly task list for things that I wasn't necessarily sure which day they were going to get done, but I wanted somewhere to drop them, or for things that were coming up later in the week but weren't for the current day I was working on. Any of those current day tasks would be dropped in my daily logs, which come directly after this, so we just have the header, the list, next header, next list. I also included a little migrated section every so often, and while I didn't really use it in the first week, the weeks that follow I did a pretty good job of actually making sure to add things down. And amongst this I just have the simple decoration, trying to not take up too much space on the pages, because while I could get a little heavier on the decoration with the weekly setup because of the space I had available, in the dailies I wanted to make sure that the majority of the space on here was available for my task lists, especially because I'm working in a smaller journal now, this one being a B6, which is not only smaller in terms of page real estate, but also in terms of number of pages. I want to be mindful of how much space I'm giving myself to note things down. I already kind of foresee that this journal might only last me 3 months or 1 quarter, so we might end up with another new journal setup at the end of quarter 3. No promises, we'll have to wait and see what happens. But something else I also wanted to bring back this cycle was my mid-cycle and end-of-cycle check-ins. This is essentially just a little dedicated space to do some reflection on how am I going with my goal work, especially with the 3 months to change your life challenge. I want to be doing these check-ins to make sure that I am maintaining progress. I'm not letting things kind of like fall behind. Or if I do, I'm at least planning how I'm going to get back on track. In this mid-cycle check-in, it was just very simple with progress made, any little wins or achievements, any challenges I'd faced, and any responses I had to the challenges. And then we just continue with the daily logging spaces. We have the current week when I'm filming, so not everything is done on here yet. Some additional space for some daily logs. Then we have the week 4 dashboard, which again just has that same simple structure. And I've actually been quite enjoying this one, so I'll probably stick with something similar for next month. But as said, something that I wanted to kind of step away from was having to stick elements in, because I'm gonna be busy. I don't want to be fiddling around with a glue stick or a tape roller when I could just use something that already has an adhesive. The reason that I'm actually gonna be as busy as I am next month though is because my wedding is coming up at the end of August. Originally, when we got underway with planning our wedding, I started setting up a wedding journal in this A5 Art Journal notebook. I thought the design was pretty, I really loved the color and how it kind of matches our color palette, and I also used that color palette to inspire the overall theme I was using in the journal. So in particular, I picked up this tape, which you can see is a PET tape, very shiny, from the washi tape shop, because the colors in this kind of match the color palette as well. I used the same lettering style or font that I was going to use on our wedding website, and I got underway with setting things up in here. You can see our very extensive task list of things that needed to be done, but eventually I found that recording the information on here when I also had it in a digital space just felt kind of redundant, so despite setting up the base of a lot of the layouts, I didn't get much further than that. I've literally had this tape roll sitting in my drawer just waiting for me to come back in and do something with this notebook, but what I'm going to do instead is use it to inspire the theme for August. I figured it was fitting to use that for the month of the wedding. technically speaking, given that I do cyclic planning instead of monthly planning, cycle 2 of quarter 3 actually doesn't have my wedding day in there, but because the big focus for this next cycle is gonna be wedding preparations, I figured it still makes sense to have the general color palette I was going to use in the wedding journal as the theme for the upcoming cycle. Now, there was definitely a time in my bullet journaling where going straight into a weekly setup before doing any kind of monthly pages was sacrilege. Like, the idea of that would be very unappealing. But I also used to be the kind of journaler who would always do a cover page for the month, kind of as a way to bookmark the start of the new month, have something a little bit decorative in there, because I like to lean into that kind of fresh slate, milestone moment type of feeling, and a new month or a new quarter or a new year always kind of gives that to me. After many monthly journal setups though, I did eventually move away from those monthly cover pages. First, I started to try and make them a little bit more functional, so it felt like they were more useful, or like the effort that I was putting in to set them up was going to have payoff in terms of productivity or functionality. And when I found myself just not flipping back to check in with them, I kind of scrapped doing a cover page in favor of what was truly a dashboard style layout, which had different sections for different pieces of information that I wanted to organize. And while I did use that fairly well for a couple of months, eventually I fell off with using that as well. I feel like I'm in that season of my journaling where I'm really trying to lean into only including the layouts and elements that I'm actively using. That's not to say that I'll never bring back those other pages, it's just that where my life is right now, the ones I'm putting in here are only the ones that I know I'm gonna get use out of. And given the fact that the Mind Unwind page, which had become my kind of like start of month layout, didn't really get used for July, I didn't see much point in including it again for August. That's not to say that I won't be doing Mind Unwinds or brain dumps throughout the month, because I probably will. I'll definitely have a lot of mental clutter that I'll need to get rid of. I'm just not dedicating a spread to a full monthly one. Given the fact that I already know that August is going to be busy, I don't want the added pressure of trying to keep up with layouts that aren't necessarily serving me. And right now, the main things that are serving me are my weekly dashboards, my daily logs, and my check-ins for my goals. While at some points during my journaling, I love to try out new layouts, go with things that are a little bit different, whether they be a different structure, different trackers, mainly because that novelty keeps me coming back to my journal. It makes it fun to use and interesting. But when life feels a little chaotic and you know you just need to get in, write stuff down, and then get on with it, taking an easy and familiar approach is a good idea. And that's one of the things that I really love about bullet journaling, because you make it yourself. You know, you go in and you set up these structures and layouts for yourself. It means that you can change things up. You don't have to use the exact same structure all the time. If you find that a layout isn't working for you, or isn't working as well as you thought it would, or you're not remembering to fill it in, you can make changes the next time you set it up so it does work better for you. As said though, the weekly structure that I've been using for July has been working quite well for me. I like that it has just the things that are actually necessary for me to keep track of and nothing extra. Like, yes, it has extras in terms of decoration, because if my journal doesn't look nice, I'm not gonna use it. But the main sections that I put on here are a space to write down my meals for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for each day of the week, a space for my priorities or the actions that I want to be taking for my goals, a running task list done in the Alice Stair method, so we have a column for each day of the week, and I can put a little dot underneath the relevant header to show when I'm going to be doing that task, or when I hope to be doing that task. And then at the bottom of the right hand page we have my routine tracker, or a habit tracker. These ones again are related to my goals and are the daily actions that I want to be taking in order to work on those. I used to be a really big fan of a vertical monthly habit tracker, and that was actually the first habit tracker I found really worked for me, but over time I found that it started not to. And while that could have been an opportunity to beat myself up like, oh, you know, you've been using this for so long and it worked so well for you, and now you're just being lazy, or you're not dedicated to your habits or something like that, I just got to a point where that structure wasn't aligned with how I was using my journal, and so I changed it up. I guess all this to say that if you're finding that there's something that's not quite working in your journal, it is a much better idea to do future you a favor and kind of look at that a little bit closer, examine why it's not working. Is it too difficult to fill in? Is it not enjoyable to fill in? Do you not like the way it looks? And then once you figure out what the possible cause might be, do a little experiment or change something up to see if something will work better. The first weekly dashboard took about 18.5 minutes to set up, and then just like we had in July, the thing that's going to come after this are my daily logs. One of the things that I love about daily logging though is being able to fit other sections in amongst those daily logs, so themed lists or little migrated sections, maybe a packing list or something like that if I need it. And given that I'm not having a monthly Mind Unwind space, I wanted to dedicate a space at the very start of the new cycle for a brain dump. I like to call these mind unwinds, mainly because I like the rhyming and I think it sounds a little nicer. And I feel like that's kind of what the point of it is. It's to unwind all of those thoughts that are running around in my head, keeping me mentally cluttered, and just get them out onto paper so that I can sort them out, prioritize, scrap the things that don't actually have to be done but were just taking up headspace. And while mine is usually related to tasks and to-dos, you can also use this space for journaling, getting out ruminated thoughts, or anything else that's in your head that you want to get onto paper so that you can do other stuff. Like I mentioned before, I don't tend to use my journal if it doesn't look nice, so I am adding a little bit of decoration to this spread, but because this is the main space that my tasks are going to be recorded, I really want to keep the majority of the space quite open so that I have as much room as possible. It's kind of a balancing act between having the decoration, so I like the way it looks and thus am more likely to use it, and also having the space available to use it. Because this one was just a header and some simple decoration though, it only took me about 3 minutes to set up, and a good chunk of that time was fighting with my script washi tape because it wouldn't lay down nicely in the corner of the page. That was more of a user error than the washi tape's fault though. I actually do quite like the tape. I like that because the script is quite scribbly, the words don't stand out all that well, which means it blends into the background nicely and doesn't distract from the writing I'm gonna put on the page, whether that be the different daily headers or my task lists. If you're curious about any of the supplies I've used though, I have listed them in the description box below for you, but I've been finding that my daily logs have been taking up roughly 1.5 spreads per week, or 3 pages, so I decorated 2 spreads here before the spread that we're going to be using to set up the second weekly dashboard. Now in July, I set up my weekly dashboards the exact same every single time, mainly so that I could get a good feel for whether the structure actually worked for me, and also to save time on the setup. By doing it the exact same over and over, it meant that I didn't have to remeasure sections, I didn't have to figure out the spacing or how to make things fit together. But for August, while I want the same sections, I didn't want to have them look exactly the same every single week. One of the easiest ways to change up a layout while keeping the functionality the same is just moving the spaces around. So rather than having the priorities and meals on the left-hand side, I put those on the right instead, and then switched that with the tasks and routine spaces. Their actual kind of positioning on the page is essentially just mirrored. That means that I get to keep all of the sections that have been working well for me and have been helpful, but I also get the novelty of a slightly different layout. I think this type of change up is really good for anybody who knows that the structures they're using in their journal really do work for them. They like what they have, but things are starting to feel just a little bit stale. It's essentially just a soft way to make changes in your journal, while still keeping all of those parts that are going to be useful for you. Monthly themes are also one of the ways that I make things feel novel in my journal. So typically going from one month to the next, I try and do things that are distinctly different from each other so it feels fresh. This is mainly done with the decorative elements that I'm using, including lettering styles, the stickers and tapes that I'm using. Color palette is a really big one though, and so when I was going to be leaning into the same base color for these layouts as I did in July, I knew that I wanted to use them differently. In July, I used the second line highlight, which is really great for adding some visual interest to the page and also increasing the readability of larger walls of text. But to make August feel a little bit different, you'll have seen on the weeklies in particular, rather than highlighting every second line, I'm just going through and drawing horizontal lines. These are all done freehand, so they're a little bit wobbly, but if you lock your wrist and don't try to rotate it to move your pen, instead just dragging your entire arm towards yourself, I found that that way you can get them fairly straight. Not perfectly straight. If you want perfectly straight lines, then using something like a ruler would be better, but I think it matched well with the softness of the other decorative elements that I have. So the torn pieces of washi tape, the broken lines around the outside of different sections. While the headers are printed and thus look quite uniform, I like that the other parts look a little bit softer and a little more organic. While in this video I've only done 2 weekly setups, so week 1 and then week 2, which we have here, I'm kind of wondering if I maybe hold off on setting up week 3 and 4, just in case there are any changes that I want to make. Maybe the needs that I have for my journal might be slightly different come week 3 and 4, or I could set them up in advance and thus have future Jess not having to do it while she's stressed out trying to prepare everything for the wedding. While I do definitely like to batch my setup work in my journal, just while I've got all the supplies out, means that I don't have to go and get them out again. It also means that once I've gone and kind of pre-decorated the pages, I can put things away which makes my workspace just that much clearer and nicer to work in. But at the same time, I'm balancing this with being able to predict my needs for my journal in advance, especially if I set up the stuff for week 4 now. That's 4 weeks away, so I might not include everything that would be necessary if something comes up, or I might end up putting in sections that become redundant. That's also in part why I'm not going and pre-populating my routine trackers with what routines I'm going to be keeping track of, because I might find in a couple weeks time that the stuff I'm tracking on there doesn't need to be tracked, it's no longer relevant, or maybe there'll be other things that I want to track instead. One of the ways that I'm helping myself out is just having the general structures in without actually populating any of the information, but another way is holding off on week 3 and 4 until I'm just a little bit closer to then. I'd be very curious to know, how far in advance do you set up your journal? I know some people set up like a full year in advance. They'd be setting up their December pages for 2026 in 2025, whereas some people are much more likely to set up for any given week just as it starts. And of course, there are also some times where we fall a little behind and we end up setting up the week in question when it's already underway, but I'd be curious to hear which category you typically fall into. Along with my weekly dashboards and my daily log spaces though, another thing I've really been enjoying so far in this journal is bringing back those check-ins. So whether they be a mid-cycle or like a mid-month check-in, or an end-of-month or end-of-cycle reflection. These are just intentional times where I get to look over the progress I'm making towards my goals, really highlighting the fact that I'm making progress, acknowledge the challenges that I faced, and plan for how I'm going to be taking action moving forward. My previous mid-month check-ins were quite involved, they had quite a lot of sections, and while I do still have several sections in there, I wanted to simplify it a little bit to make it easier to keep up with, or more likely that I'd actually get in and do it. Rather than using a full spread for my mid-cycle check-in, I've streamlined it a little bit so that it fits onto one page, and we have 5 sections, those being wins, progress, challenges, responses, and routines. The wins section is specifically to write down positive outcomes. So those could be kind of like completing a goal and kind of reaching the end of it, being able to check it off like that, or any little milestones that I've hit in working on other goals. Because a lot of my 3 months to change your life goals aren't actually going to get hit until I get to the end of the 3 months. But I still want to be acknowledging the progress that I'm making there. The way that wins is different to progress though, is progress is more about the actions I've taken rather than the outcomes that have come from that action. So wins is kind of like results, whereas progress is more about actions. There might be a little bit of overlap, in particular overlap with the goals that are being recorded in there, because some goals will have progress in terms of the actions I've taken, but also wins in terms of the outcomes that I've received. Challenges, on the other hand, is kind of self-explanatory. That's anything that has been happening in particular that has been holding me back from taking action on my goals, or making goal actions harder to take. For instance, some of the challenges that I noted down in my last mid-cycle check-in were physical pain, eating off plan, not making the best use of my time, or having kind of like larger chunks of unfocused time, not pre-planning my days, or really diving into projects that required a lot of my focus and leaving other ones behind. What I also like to think about though is when those challenges came about, how did I respond to them? And were those responses helping or hindering me? I keep the challenges and responses sections intentionally smaller than the wins and progress because I all too easily fall into that negativity bias, just really dwelling on the stuff that I haven't accomplished or the progress I'm not making. So making those sections smaller means that I'm kind of forcing myself in a way to look at the positive and highlight those things that I have been doing, the progress I am making, rather than just dwelling on the not so great stuff. The routine section is actually one that I didn't include in my last mid-cycle check-in, but I thought it would be helpful to have just to monitor how well I'm going with those routines. Like how many days out of the first 2 weeks did I successfully accomplish waking up on time, going to bed on time, doing my exercise, all of those kind of things. Mainly because I often find that while I like having the routine tracker or that kind of like weekly habit tracking space, once the week is over, I don't often go back and actually do anything with that data. So I think that giving myself a total for the 2-week periods can essentially allow myself to gamify it a little bit. Like, okay, the last time I did this check-in, I only got 7 out of 14 days where I ate according to plan. Maybe with my next check-in, I set the target to make that 10 days instead of 7. something like that. Given that this layout is fairly simple though, it only took me about 4 minutes to set up, but I know it'll probably take me a little bit longer to fill in as I really try and be thorough with thinking about how I'm going with my goals. Monitoring our progress is one of the integral parts of the 3 months to change your life challenge, and I'm really glad that I have these structures in my journal to not only hold me accountable to doing the actions that I need to do, but also to capture the progress that I'm making, like successfully doing those daily routines, getting those action steps checked off and accomplished. And although August is going to be busy, I'm looking forward to making more progress on these things. Flipping back though so that we can flip through, even though it does feel weird to have a weekly log be the very first layout in my new monthly setup, I'm excited for the more pared back and streamlined approach that I know is going to be much easier to keep up with when I'm in this busy season, and also doesn't end up giving me any guilt when I, set up a layout and then don't use it. I have the stuff in here that's going to help me do the things that I want to do, and it won't distract me with capturing information that I don't end up using, or overcomplicating my planning in a way that's detrimental to getting things done. As kind of touched on, a lot of the structures that I'm putting in my journal are very much aligned with helping me with the 3 months to change your life challenge. If you were curious about that one and maybe wanted to get involved with us, or just follow along with the progress we're making, then this video is the next one to check out. That one has all the information you need to know about what the challenge is about and how to get involved, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.